Welcome to Public Speaking with Peter George. Do you want to be calm, confident, and credible every time you speak in public? Then stay tuned as Peter and his guests discuss public speaking tips, techniques, and tactics that help you increase your impact, influence, and income. Here's your host, Peter George.
Have you ever felt like you weren't being heard, or that others in the room seemed to command more respect than you? Well, my guest, Kym Dakin, says that the reason just may be the way you use your voice. So listen in and learn how you can use your voice and other techniques so you can connect with your listeners every time. Kym has been a working creative, coach, and trainer for almost 30 years. She specializes in theater and improv skills in high-impact experiential training through her company, Voice into Learning. Kym is a founding member of the Portland Playback Theater, combining structured improvisation with community storytelling. And she is also the author of Don't Trust Your Ears, a revolutionary way to listen that'll change your world. Kym's teaching credentials include Bowdoin College, the University of Southern Maine, the University of New Hampshire, and the University of New England. Here's my chat with Kym Dakin. Hi, Kym. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Peter. This will be fun.
Kym, when we first discussed getting together for this episode, you suggested we talk about women raising their status in public speaking situations. Why do you want to focus on that topic in particular?
I find, particularly working with younger women, and I would say middle-aged women as well, that there are certain vocal tics that women are not aware of, that they use to sort of lower their status and make other people feel larger by contrast, for lack of a better word. And I started becoming curious about this because I have always thought that vocal production, the way we present ourselves, particularly vocally, is a source of power for women who are usually lower status in engagements with men. Not always, but I would say usually. We're smaller in stature, etc. So I became a vocal specialist about 25 years ago. And people started telling me that when I walked into a room, now I have to tell you, I'm 5'3". I looked like a kid until I was in my middle 40s. So I was running at a deficit anyway. But after a while, after working on my voice, people started to tell me that I would walk into a room, I would open my mouth and say something, and suddenly people were paying attention. People would look at me and go, wow, that sound came out of you. And I started to realize that it was really a benefit. And it's not one that we think about in our culture. Our culture is very visually attuned, and we don't really think that much about how somebody's vocal quality, vocal tone, the words they use are impacting us. And I think we need to start learning, not just for presentation purposes, but for gauging the impact of other people's speech on us and how it's affecting us. I think most of us notice if somebody's got a really annoying, like a nasal voice or something really, really awful, but we don't tend to notice much when we're just listening to somebody talk ordinarily. So I started to become interested in this because it was clear to me that women could definitely raise their status if they knew how to use their voice.
So what can they do to become more confident speakers or raise their status? Anything in particular, anything specific?
Well, as you know, as you are a public speaking coach, there are lots of things you can do. But for me, it starts with breath control. It starts with getting yourself on the same page as your audience and allowing yourself time and space to tune in to where they are, getting a read on what they need, and then finding your way into it. I've been working with a woman who has developed a product for which she is going into pitch contests. She was a former librarian, and she definitely sounds like a former librarian. So she struggles with finding her feet in a presentation. She's an incredibly inventive, smart, capable person. She knows the ins and outs of this particular product that she's manufacturing like nobody else. But when it comes to having to pitch the product, in a word, when it comes to having to sell the idea to people that could help her, she has a hard time finding her way in. And so our work together is going to involve how to make the first 30 seconds the most impactful, right? I see you nodding your head, Peter, and you know exactly what I'm talking about.
First 30 seconds are key.
Because if you don't, you know it right away. We're animals. We understand when we're in front of a large group of other animals who are getting bored or dissatisfied or shuffling around, we can feel it. And the more we feel it, the worse it gets. So the first 30 seconds, if you know no other part of your presentation, nail the first 30 seconds. So that's what we'll be working on. And a lot of it is her vocal quality too. She gets way up here when she starts to feel insecure and she sounds insecure. So it just, I have learned over the last couple of years that the authenticity of our experience is really reflected in our voice. So if I can coach people to gain a little mastery over their voice, how they're conveying themselves, how they're breathing, how they're going into something, then that's worth quite a lot as far as the outcome is concerned, particularly in the first 30 seconds.
You mentioned breathing. We think, well, we breathe. We breathe every day. It's done at the unconscious level. What's the big deal? But when you mention this librarian who's going to be pitching and she gets way up in her voice, do you think that's a result of not breathing, diaphragmatic breathing, or deep breathing, or using her breath the way she should be?
It's a big part of it. But again, it's like preparing for the first 30 seconds. It's really key. I get people to figure out, to experiment with what their beginning ritual needs to be. How are you going to prepare yourself? What's the best way for you to prepare yourself? That may be different from my best way to prepare myself. But it's worth experimenting with. And a big piece that I really push is a couple of breath exercises, breathing exercises. The count into 4 slowly as you inhale, count out to 8, 6 to 8, maybe longer. As you exhale, do that a couple of times. Usually by that time, people's blood pressure has slowed down a bit and they can be more present. There's a great exercise called 3-2-1, and I've seen it now kind of converted into 5-4-3-2-1, which has to do with tuning into what your senses are telling you. So you name 5 things you can see. Try to focus on those 5 things exclusively. You close your eyes, you get in touch with 4 things you can hear. And again, try to focus your attention on only those 4 things. 3 things you can feel, bodily sensations. 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. And by the time you put yourself through that sort of regimen, you're in a more present place because it gets you focused outside yourself and your own whatever's going on. So things like that. There's also, I'm sure you've heard of Amy Cuddy's TED Talk.
Oh, sure.
I love her whole premise around putting your body in certain positions that make you feel a certain way. So I'll coach my clients, particularly women, to find a power stance and whatever that means for them. And then to create a power mantra. Again, that's their invention. It's interesting to me that there are a lot of positions that men put themselves in as power stances. For instance, if I sit in a chair and I put my hands behind my head and my elbows back and I look at the ceiling, I never see women do this. I see plenty of men do it, never see women do it. But it opens up your chest. Suddenly you're breathing differently. Suddenly you're focused on what's possible rather than whatever the fire is you're trying to put out in front of you. Again, we're animals and our physiology informs our reality, whether we're aware of it or not.
I'd never heard that 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and I love it because now you're thinking about and focusing on things other than you. And I think we put way too much onus on ourselves, way too much weight on our own shoulders. What if I screw up? What if I say this? What if I?
Right.
Well, who can deal with that? It's a lot of pressure.
And even if people really pump themselves up to go in, I'm the best, I'm the greatest, this is going to rock. It's all about you. And you're not tuning into anything that's going on around you, let alone your audience. And I know I've gotten some of your emails because I signed up for your newsletter. And I know that tuning into the audience is a big thing for you. And it's one of the most important facets. When you think about what you're trying to offer your audience, what you're trying to cause in your audience, that's a big piece. It becomes more of a conversation that way.
That's exactly what I teach my clients is create a presentation like it's a conversation, as if the audience is answering and speaking to you, because in actuality, they are.
They are. That's
it
right.
might not be out loud, but they're communicating with you. Whether it's creating a ritual, and I love that idea because I do that from the time I start creating my presentation all the way through. And I'm thinking about in June, I'll be presenting in New Hampshire. I know what I'll be doing in that hotel room that morning.
Right.
And prepping myself. I know what song I'll be listening to.
That's right.
I know what I'll be doing is I walk into the room before I get up on stage. Those things help me center myself.
That's right.
And focus on the audience.
Yeah.
And as I tell all my clients, it's not about you. It's all about the audience. And when they realize that, now they can find that confidence and actually have fun.
Yes. And that's really key. That is really key.
How can women make their next presentation more fun? You might as well have fun while you're up there because people can realize it. Your audience knows when you're having fun being with them.
I think most of us have a hard time being vulnerable in front of strangers. But I have found that in lots of ways, it's really the key to having fun. I'll share a story from my childhood that actually made me discover this, or rather I rediscovered it as an adult. I took piano lessons for a long time, and I was pretty good. I was a pretty good piano player, but it used to freak me out having to play in recitals. These 10 little entities had to somehow know what to do. Outside of my brain, I just had to trust my fingers, and I really struggled with it. I couldn't eat for days. I couldn't sleep. I mean, I was just torturing myself. But when I was 12, it was my turn to walk out on stage. And I got myself on the piano bench, and I realized the piano bench was way too close. So, I'm 12 years old. I don't want to call attention to anything that I might need. But something in me just said, I got to fix this bench. So I took a deep breath. I got up, I pulled the bench out, and I got back down. That recital was one of the best that I had ever done because I had shared a piece of my authenticity just silently. I was uncomfortable. I needed to take charge of this one element. And in taking charge of that one element, I found everything else could relax. So I would say sharing a piece of your own authenticity and vulnerability will get your audience on your side. I think it works more often than not. I had a speech workshop via Zoom that I was doing for some people in California this week. And I was sharing something I've developed called a 3-part story. Ditch the pitch, as in ditch the elevator pitch. Tell a short 3-part story instead. And so I demonstrated this. And the first thing I wanted people to share is a piece of their own authenticity, a little bit of vulnerability, something they've done for credibility, and something they want. So the first thing I shared was the fact that my name is Kym Dakin. I'm the founder of Voice into Learning, and I am 65 years old. Everyone was flabbergasted. It's like nobody ever tells their age, particularly a woman who's 65 years old. I said, the reason I'm sharing that with you is because I recently developed a bookmarking app called Nugget to reduce the need to take notes in online meetings. Now, I am not a techie. I had a great team for that. But in pitch contests, the Nugget lady became the one to beat. The good news, we sold Nugget a couple months ago for a really nice price. The better news is I got 3 pitch presentation clients from that one pitch contest. So that's an example of what I'm saying. I love working with entrepreneurs, introverts, and women in bringing the presentations to life.
Are women as apt to speak about themselves or what they're doing or their accomplishments as men are?
No, on all fronts.
And the reason I ask is I am married to a woman who is very successful in business, and she has no problem speaking about herself. But I see her as the outlier, or one of the outliers. And I don't see that necessarily in a lot of women as much as I do men. Men, I think, sometimes overdo it. But why do you think that is? And how can women overcome that? How can they get that confidence?
I think part of it is just knowing what you're going to say, figuring out ahead of time the 3 most important things you want your audience to know about you that really lend credibility to what you're saying. I think that's key. And sometimes it takes just memorizing it. You know, if somebody asks me, Kym, what do you do? I help people with presentation training. My company's called Voice into Learning. I have a master's degree in adult education. And I recently developed an online bookmarking app called Nugget. So you know 3 things about me right away. And now that I've gotten that out of the way, we can have a conversation because I feel like I've shared something of who I am. Those are all 3 very good things. And now I can sort of open my space to ask my questioner some good questions. You know, what do you do? What's important to you? What values run your business? How are you presenting them? You know, what's key to you in making sure you get something out of our session today? There's all kinds of places that can go. But I think if you're going to decide to walk into the room really in charge of who you are and what you've accomplished, that can go a long way towards raising your status in just about any interaction.
I like how you said, practice it, practice what you want to say. And I think a lot of us, whether it's men speaking or women speaking, we don't realize how much they practice. We think they just have that ability to come out and say it, but they practice behind the scenes.
That's exactly right. And then there are those people who seem to just be able to spin stories out of thin air, but they're a lot rarer than people think.
It's no different, I believe, than the 3-year-old who sits down at a piano and plays Mozart, even though he's never had a lesson.
That's right.
That happens in life. There are some of those,
That's
but,
very, very, very,
you know, don't hold your breath, as it were.
That's right. Chances are your kid is not one of those.
I know breathing was one, prepping is another. What's one more tip you can give that'll help them present?
Much as we hate this, I'm going to encourage people to tape yourself, tape your presentation on video, on audio, and get used to looking at yourself, watching yourself, view yourself with compassion, not judgment, and keep doing it over and over, you will learn an enormous amount. We do need to practice. We absolutely do. And if you take like 20 minutes for a week prior to your presentation to just work on that presentation, I guarantee you're going to hit it out of the park.
We have as speakers today, I believe, the best tool ever invented for speakers, the phone.
That's right.
Right? Just prop it up, hit record.
Boom.
We certainly don't like listening to ourselves because our voice is different than what we know it to be. Why do you think we don't like watching ourselves?
We're just so critical, and women in particular. We get judged on our appearance so much. So it's not an easy exercise. But if you can get to the point where you stop judging what you look like and tune into what you sound like and the message that you're conveying, if you can stop being distracted or intimidated by the camera, you're going to go a long way, no matter what your endeavor is, no matter what you're trying to communicate.
And do you think that becomes easier the second and third time you record?
It absolutely does. And you learn things, you know? There is a certain technique to good lighting for video. You'll find out what that is. There's a certain place to position your camera. I think since everything went on Zoom, we kind of had to all learn how to deal with Zoom and where to put the camera so our double chin doesn't show or whatever. So there are ways to do that. And finding out those ways is actually your job as a presenter and a communicator. And the more you dig into it, the more it's going to pay off.
Kym, thank you so much for coming on my show and sharing your time and expertise. Where can my listeners learn more about you and the services you provide?
They can go to my website at kymdakin.com. And I'm on LinkedIn.
And it's KYM, right?
It is KYM. Thank you for that. KYM, D as in David, AKIN.com.
Well, Kym, thanks so much for being here. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Peter. It's been really fun.
That's a wrap of another episode of Public Speaking with Peter George. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Tune in Monday when you'll hear another episode of Public Speaking with Peter George, and again Thursday for your next episode of Quick Bites, public speaking tips and techniques you can digest in 5 minutes or less. Until next time, remember, when it comes to speaking in public, you've got this.